Welcome, everyone. My name is Heather Taylor. I am the Communications Director for the Citizens Campaign. I am also the organizer of the Hyperlocal News Association. For those unfamiliar, the Citizens Campaign is a nonpartisan grassroots organization which empowers citizens to get more involved. From that, we formed the Hyperlocal News Association to give journalists and reporters the tools and training they need to better cover local government, which is tonight is a training workshop that we host as the Hyperlocal News Association. All of this tonight is made possible by funding from the Rita Allen Foundation, so I want to thank them. Just please go like us on Facebook and on Twitter, both Citizens Campaign and the Hyperlocal News Association. We really like that. When you checked in, I just wanted to point out we handed you two different forms, maybe, or one. This is the answer the call form. This tells us what you're interested in and how you want to get involved. If you turn this in at the end of the night, we will love you, and we will give you a free citizens manual. So please, this is a great resource. It has all your legal rights and best practices for getting involved in local government. And if you are a journalist, a blogger, a citizen journalist, we have the Hyperlocal News Association. We are looking for people to always join and be a part of this. These are people who want to go to their meetings and report what's happening in their community. But now let's turn to the fun stuff, what we're all here for. Open Public Records Act and the Sunshine Law. These are two tools that are critical to both citizens and journalists to monitor how government spends money, how the police are operating, how different departments are operating, how public policy is being shaped in our communities. And it's timely, too, because this January marks the 10-year anniversary of OPRA being adopted and set into law. And I think it's a good time to reflect on, both what is in the law and practice, and then how does it happen in our towns across the state on the ground. And then the Sunshine Law is long overdue for an overhaul. I think Bobby can probably confirm this. It's like 30 years old, maybe. It still says they have to disclose telegrams, and so it's definitely due for an overhaul. But there's questions in each town of how they implement the Sunshine Law, how they abide by it, and the best is to learn from experts. So with that, let me just introduce our panel. You have their bios, so I'll just say a couple words about each person. First is Colleen O'Day. She is an expert reporter. She was with the Daily Record for more than 25 years. She really was using OPRA as a tool to show what was happening in public policy, how our money was being spent at the local level. She really used data to shape a story of what was happening in the communities, and I think I'm really glad she came because she can share her wisdom with us. Robert Byrne, next to her, is the clerk for Jersey City. He is a lifelong resident, and he's been, can I say that?
No, I'm actually a resident in Cliffside Park. When I married my wife, I moved to Cliffside Park. You won a residency argument.
He's been the clerk since he was 29. And he is
how many years ago?
As municipal clerk, he is in charge for maintaining records, for fulfilling OPRA requests. He is the chief election officer. He has served under 8 different mayors, 8 different administrations, so I'm sure he has seen it all. He handles OPRA requests on a daily basis, and we're really lucky to have him here tonight. John Paff, for those that know him, he probably needs no introduction. He is an open government advocate. His #1 mission in life is to hold government accountable. He is the chair of the Open Government Advocacy Project for the New Jersey Libertarian Party. And John is such a resource. Whenever I email him, within 10 minutes he is emailing back statutes and citations with the legal responses. So we're really happy to have him as well. And last but not least is Bobby Connor. He is the Open Governance Attorney for the ACLU of New Jersey. He handles OPRA requests. He has studied OPRA, Sunshine Law, FOIA, inside and out. He knows the law. He's trying to defend people's rights to get records and show the sunshine in local government. So we're really happy. Just for the basics of tonight, I'm going to start off just asking some questions that I prepared for the panel for the first half, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. I would like to say when we get to the Q&A, please keep your questions short and on point and not specific to a town. We want everyone to be able to benefit from the answers, so we're going to try to not make these just examples of what's happening in your community, but questions that are global for the whole state. So please don't get mad at me if I cut you off. So my first question, I wanted Robert Burns sort of walk us through what happens when an OPRA request comes in to City Hall. Let's say it's for a redevelopment authority that may not, or some sort of department that doesn't have their own public information officer, but you as the clerk are responsible. What happens, and how do you navigate that?
Well, if a request comes in for minutes for the redevelopment agency, we have an ordinance in Jersey City that requires all agencies to file their minutes in my office. So it's one-stop shopping. It's just, scan it and email it and send it off to the requester.
Do you ever have difficulty with other departments?
I have to pull molars sometimes. The clerk is the person civilly responsible. If somebody, we have some recalcitrant department director who keeps bad records and you really can't, you have a hard time getting the records, but we're the ones that, guys like John Paff, have to hold responsible for getting the information in a timely manner. But I've had to walk out of my office, take an walk over to police headquarters, walk into the police chief's office and say, I want that, I need that, and you're gonna give me that. And sometimes it's hard to do, but 7 days is a long time for someone to wait for something, but sometimes it's not enough time to pull it out of somebody's office. And some people don't keep the best records. Sometimes it's not because they don't want to give it to you, they're just not keeping great records to begin with. And that can be a source of the problem.
John Paff, you've done hundreds of OPRA requests. I wanted you to share some of your best practices. What do you do to get the record? Do you know to go to the police department straight if you want to get something, or how do you do it?
I generally, I have a computerized system at this point. I have so many requests, it's hard to keep track of all of them. So I have a system that allows me to make a request via email from a home page, and it actually records the request. It will then assign a number to it, and I will see when its 7 business days have run, and I'll be able to follow up on it. The one thing that I like to do is to be reasonable and to be clear. A lot of requests that I read from other people that are complaining about a clerk is not doing what they're supposed to do. The requests are either overly broad or else they're not well written in other ways. First off, I never ask for 10 years worth of anything. Okay? Because first off, I'm not going to have time to reveal. I'm not going to ask for something that I don't have time to reveal. I will ask for 2 months worth of something and see if I need more. I can always ask for them. OPRA requests aren't a one-shot deal. It's not like you have to ask for the everything you need at once. You can ask for it sequentially, and you can build on the information that you receive from your first request to tailor your second request. What I do is I'm very careful the way I do it over, because I spend a pretty good deal of time making sure that I'm very clear on what I want. I like to include a background section. I put background : and then after that I have records requested. Like I'll tell the Boonton town clerk that I am trying to identify the person's municipal police department that's charged with marijuana and hashish possession and sales during the recent 3-month period. Records requested. Number 1, and this helps if you know this record exists, is the New Jersey UCR 370 report, which is the age, sex, race, and ethnic origin of the persons arrested 18 years of age or older, submitted by your municipal police department during the months of May, June, and July of 2011. 2 would be copies of the front and back of each complaint, which would be the CDR1 or CDR2 or other form of summons complaint, reported on lines 182 and 187 of that report, which are for marijuana and hashish possession. And you end up getting, if you ask for something clearly, you end up getting the kind of response that you want. You actually get the records promptly that you request. I have very little trouble getting records from clerks. And I think a lot of it is because I take a lot of time and limit the scope of my request to only a few months worth of records, and 2 is I'm very clear on what it is that I want. So that's and second, if you have a problem with a clerk, if you don't get a response, I've seen people, they'll actually file a GRC complaint with the Government Records Council on the 8th business day. I don't find that to be tremendously productive. It's better to call the clerk up and say, hey, did you get my OPRA request? I didn't get an answer, and today's the 8th business day, what's up? And usually the clerk will say something like, I didn't get an OPRA request. What OPRA request? Then you'll find out that it was faxed and somebody else grabbed it or something. Things happen. So you say, are you sitting by your fax machine? I'll fax it to you again. It's, most times the records I'm asking for, I don't really need them. It's not critical that I have within 7 business days. I want to have some time period, otherwise clerks might take forever. But I don't need to have it right away. I can wait 10 days or 14 days for my record. So I try to accommodate the clerk. And that pays dividends because the clerks start to get to know you and like you a little bit more than if you're constantly beating on them with a stick. So part of it is reasonableness as well, in addition to clarity and brevity.
Thank you. Bobby, one of the most common denials that people are getting these days is the administrative, deliberative, or consultative denial. Can you fill us in where this came from, what types of records fall under this category? Do you agree that they're not public? And do you think there might be a way to, through court cases, maybe push back a little bit on these types of records being exempted?
Well, there's obviously a lot to say about this exemption. It is being used more and more now. It's a concept that's been around for a very long time, very well grounded and established in federal case law, as well as our own common law case law here in the state, and as well as it's been expressly put into the OPRA statute. I think that a couple things that you should know about the exemption is that to fall under it, basically there's a two-pronged test, and the first test is that the document or the material that you're seeking, or whatever in question that is being claimed deliberative, has to be made prior to the decision that is made by the government agency. So that's the first prong of the test. And then the second prong of the test is that it actually has to be deliberative. And I mean, that's not only in New Jersey, that's pretty much everywhere. But that two-prong test has basically sent the federal courts all across the nation really into this conundrum of, well, what is deliberative? What is facts versus opinion or advice? And that's what you're really getting into, because basically the exemption is to protect information that is used during the government's weighing of options before they make a decision. And frankly, it's a fairly good exemption because we want our government officials and public officials to be able to weigh all the options and to make an informed decisions after doing so. So basically, it's trying to keep the public from being able to second-guess decisions with the, after something has happened, in hindsight, look back and say, well, you made a mistake by doing this. That's kind of the concept behind it. But what has happened now is, a lot of the courts have had a difficult time in certain cases really deciding what is deliberative and what isn't. Because a lot of times records may contain facts and opinion. And so then you get into the concept, well, can it be redacted in a proper way that the factual part can be released, whereas the actual opinion part cannot be. And not to get too theoretical, but we were kind of in that mess, if you will, just like everyone else, until 2009, and then our Supreme Court gave us a little more information about the deliberative exemption through the Education Law Center case v. DOE. And this was basically a case of the Education Law Center, a group that advocates for public schools, or public school children. They were seeking basically the school funding formula projections, or the calculations used that the DOE used basically to help alter the school funding formula for like added districts and that sort of thing. So basically, seeking it, the DOE said no, that's deliberative. And so the whole question is, well, these are basically numbers. These are basically projections based on a calculation that doesn't change. And so that shows you how a difficult decision has to be made, because we're talking about numbers, not necessarily attorneys sitting in an office saying, well, I think you should do this or whatever. Well, our Supreme Court basically held that does count as deliberative material, and basically called that such information as a factual component. And so they basically clarified that in some situations, some factual information can be protected under this exemption when it's used like that in the deliberative process. So where does that leave us now? I mean, it is situations that come up a lot where requesters are being denied information. And it really is a case-by-case situation where you want to really look at what you're requesting and really what the denial is. I mean, I think that, for an example, we actually just released a press release today, so it's kind of stuck in my mind. I was representing the Education Law Center on getting the charter school volunteers of the DOE, they're non-DOE employees that were selected by the state to review charter school applications to help decide who gets a charter by the Commissioner of Education and who does not. And so basically they denied giving access to the names of these individuals for two reasons. And they were different based on the request for OPRA and for common law. Under OPRA, they said that it was to keep the names of non-DOE employees confidential. And then under the common law request, they said that they didn't release it because it was deliberative information. So, you can probably see where I'm going with this. In this situation, we were talking about names of people. And, my argument to the court and my briefing to the court and to the DOE was, how can the names of these people be deliberative in your decision? And, if it was indeed, if the names themselves actually influence the DOE's decisions, well, that's why it should be public, obviously, because that's what the laws are trying to prevent. Well, a year later, they wouldn't release them, and then we filed suit. And now, a year later from the request, just yesterday, they decided to release the names. So they finally decided that, I guess, that we were right in the matter and did the right thing by releasing those names. So that's just an example of this exemption is used a lot in situations that aren't. But there are many times that things should be exempt and under the exemption. But it really is a case-by-case situation. And if it comes up, obviously you feel free to call John Path or me, and we'll weed through it together and see. But it is something that is a big problem everyone knows about. And the bill that Senator Weinberg has drafted is trying to help clarify that from both the requester standpoint and the government entity standpoint of when is a proper time to use this exemption.
Thank you. We'll get to the bill a little bit later. I wanted to ask Colleen, for the budding journalists and the journalists out there in the room, you do all these OPRA requests, and how? Like you did, for those that don't know, Colleen was part of a team at the Daily Record that won the Tim O'Brien Award. It was a 9-month investigation. It was titled Super Perks, Moore's Taxpayers Foot the Bill for School Superintendents' Big Benefits. I just wanted to get your perspective as a journalist, how you identify, your process, your thought process, and what you did for 9 months using OPRA as a tool.
So, in that specific instance, the goal was to say, how much are superintendents and administrators really making? Because at the time, it was before the Department of Education put out their administrative salary guide, their administrative salary and benefits guide. So what we did was we put in an OPRA in every school district. The Daily Record being a Morris County paper, we essentially cover all the towns, all the school districts. So we put in an OPRA request in every district for the superintendent's contract. And at the same time, we said, well, let's get the teacher's contract too, because it's a good thing to have. It's got information in it, and let's make some comparisons. In the vast majority of cases, this was not a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. I mean, this is your basic document, This is one of those documents that you should be able to walk in and get handed, not have to wait 7 days for. We had a couple cases where we actually had school board administrators, school clerk, that probably was the clerk, say, well, I'm not sure if I can give you that. They have to redact the superintendent's name. Well, come on, we all know. Just really, really silly stuff. So once we got this information, I created a spreadsheet, 2 spreadsheets, one for the superintendents and one for the, for the teachers. And it was interesting if you do work like this, to try to look through and do some reading through what you get back, maybe for a day or two, because you might see some things that kind of change your perspective and the way you're gonna go about this. So like we started out looking for cars. It turns out we only had one superintendent who had a car that was paid for. But one of the things we didn't know were supplemental life insurance policies that I had no idea that boards of education took out on certain superintendents supplemental life insurance policies. So it was kind of a working document in terms of the spreadsheet, keeping track in each case of who got what. Now the result was really a great package of stories, because there were all sorts of very cool things that we found that made the readers gasp and said, my superintendent gets this? The DOE did a good thing, and for I think 2 years wound up releasing a very similar spreadsheet. They pulled back within the last year, and now if you're looking for this information, it's at the very bottom of the school budget, and it's just kind of like an agate list. So it's very hard. It's kind of like you would have to do the same work over again and put it in a spreadsheet if you want to make comparisons among school districts, among school, or among teachers. But contracts are just, everybody should have their local contracts. They're just great resources with all sorts of information in there that you can get good stories out of.
For Robert, when someone like Colleen comes, a reporter, and starts requesting lots of documents, the question I wanted to ask about is special service fees. Now, the charge right now is 5 cents per page, 7 cents per page. But the law did carve out the $25 fee for special services if it takes a lot of time. Do you use that charge, or do you know other examples from other towns? And when do you what is that?
Before the law was changed and it was reduced to a nickel a page, we had a fellow in Jersey City who had a court order that said he paid no more than 6 cents a page for paper, anything on paper. So our policy was, well, if one person is only going to pay 6 cents a page, we're going to charge everyone 6 cents a page. And if anyone's asking for a current document, whether it be a budget, an ordinance, we hand it to them and let them go on their merry way. If a person gets a parking ticket or gets a ticket for not shoveling the snow, I'm not going to compound from agony and charge her $1.50 for a copy of the ordinance that she just violated. And I'm just not going to beat myself up over it. But we do have times where people use OPRA to get around to discovery. And we've had a lawsuit in Jersey City for 10 years, and there are now 6 archive boxes in my office on this one matter. And they're suing the city, and they're requesting all these records. We've had a staff attorney go through 6,000 pieces of paper. He's paid by the city of Jersey City, and 1,600 pages out of the 6,000 were deemed to be ACD, advisory, consultative, deliberative, and we went to the GRC, and guess what? Out of 1,600 pages, the GRC made us give them 1 page. So we did a good job. That's about the only time we still haven't gotten paid for that, but that would be about the only time we would invoke any special charges, because most records are pretty available, and really things were moving along swell in Jersey City and in other towns under the Paris grant program. The state was giving money to communities to do and put their records in great shape. In fact, I got a phone call and an OPRA request from a Nigerian who wanted to know about a 1947 murder in Jersey City. So we got him the records, gave it to him, and a book came out. I was in Barnes & Noble. The guy wrote a book about the killing of Frankie DePaula. The guy was apparently mobbed up in Jersey City, and he was paid to take a dive. And he bet heavily on himself, and he won the fight. So, but he really lost it when they put a bullet in him. So, but that was one of my more interesting OPRA requests.
Bobby, I had a legal question for you. A lot of towns, I know, especially in South Jersey, are now cutting down their operating hours. Some of them are going down to being their municipal city halls are only open 2 or 3 days a week as a cost-cutting measure. Clearly, then, how does one comply with the 7-day rule? How do those sync together? And I know a lot of citizens are facing that trouble in South Jersey.
That's interesting because I actually haven't personally faced any of those things. Well, if you look to the law, there's actually 2 provisions that basically talk about timing, and they're essentially in the same section. It's well, I guess it doesn't matter, but one of them basically says that the custodian shall allow access during regular business hours. That's the first line of this section. And then it goes on to say that for smaller agencies, or like towns of less than 5,000 and school districts less than 500, and then I think like other public agencies without less than 10 million assets or something like that, don't quote me on that, can do it a little differently. And then you have the general rule, which we all know, which is access must be provided within 7 days. Well, there's a couple things that I want to say before that. And John kind of hit on it. I never, ever hold a custodian's feet to the fire for 7 days, just because sometimes I know that it's just not realistic. So I want to say that, I kind of echo John's sentiments about be very reasonable. But in situations like this, where if you have a town that's going to be cutting back their hours, that is obviously going to affect the time that they're going to be able to respond. Because if their regular business hours are cut down, that's going to be also affecting their time period. Now, I'm not sure exactly, like I said, it hasn't affected me any, because generally, I think like Mr. Byrne does and some of the others, normally if they know that they're not going to be able to comply within 7 days, based on the type of record or whatever, they're gonna contact you immediately. They're gonna send you a letter. They're gonna send, or some of them may even call you and just warn you that that's not going to be available. And
I even called you last month to say, hey, Bobby, you need to get back to me on the clarification of this.
True story.
True story.
True story.
He was a little too vague, and I'm like, hey. He says, oh, I moved on to something
he's
else.
Still
I'll
waiting
get back to you.
He's still waiting for the
I'm still
information.
waiting for you.
There are a lot of good clerks out there, like Mr. Byrne. I think most of them are good. So I think that you should definitely work with them as much as you can, and be very lenient on the time frame. What I was going to say to make sure that it's clear is, obviously the provision that says that they must grant access or deny within 7 days, the GRC has basically interpreted that to mean grant, deny, seek clarification, or contact you, I think, basically. So essentially, if the agency, the government entity, contacts you within that 7 days, they are complying with the law. So if they contact you and say, look, we're not open till next week, or this is in storage, or whatever, that's going to be, they're going to be complying with the law. And I just want to repeat again, give them a break on the time, and because usually if you do that, if it's something that you don't quite need right then, right that day or whatever, they will help you in situations where you do need something quicker.
If I could just add something to that, Bobby will call me up sometimes and say, listen, I need that, it gets dropped, an email gets dropped, it's not even an OPRA request. So then the clerk will get a couple extra days if he needs it, if it's a more complicated, it's a give and take.
That's right.
Because we have a lot of repeat customers.
No, I agree. In our citizen journalism class, I tell people, make the clerk your best friend. Like, if you want to make your job easier, don't go at this charging full steam ahead, screaming, yelling at City Hall, demanding documents, but really treat them with respect, because you do have a very large task on your hands, keeping everything in order and getting back to people. You all mentioned GRC, and I wasn't sure who wants to tell or talk about GRC. Just advice. John, do you prefer GRC over going through the courts?
No.
Actually, there's a monetary. If people don't have money to go to the court system, they're sort of forced into GRC.
It's really, for me, it depends upon the record that I'm asking for. The GRC is very good at immediately following their precedent. If they say, if they've said in one set of facts that this is the way it is, and you file a complaint on the same set of facts and refer to that case, you already know what the answer is going to be. They're going to follow what they said before. When you're dealing with the superior courts in the 21 counties, the judges, so, if a judge in Atlantic County might not really have the same belief of what something means as a judge in Sussex County. So it's more of a random thing. Plus, there's different judges. So if you have essentially an easy case or a case that the GRC has heard before, you like the way the GRC decided the most recent case, go to the GRC. Problem with the GRC is it doesn't cost anything, but it's taking them a year to 18 months to adjudicate a case. So you're in for the long haul. You're going to file a denial of access complaint, and 18 months later you're going to get a decision. Okay, and that is. But sometimes what you can do with the GRC is ask for mediation, and the mediation actually happens quite quickly. And if you're dealing with a misunderstanding more than an actual calculated denial, sometimes the mediation through GRC is a way of getting the custodian's attention and forcing them to focus on the issue. Especially if you have an attorney involved, because under the GRC or through the courts, if you prevail on an OPRA request, you get your returns fees paid by the incorrect government party. So there is an incentive for them to settle the cases. There's an incentive for them to keep litigation to a minimum. But usually, lately, especially if it's something, a lot of my cases combine common law request with the OPRA, and common law is decided by the Superior Court. So, you file your motion you file your complaint and your order to show cause, and sometimes you're in front of the court in as little as 2, maybe 6 weeks. So you get a faster response. It does cost you $230 in filing fees. If you have a strong case, the attorney will take it without having to have you personally accountable for any of the fees. If it's a strong case, the attorney will say, I'll take the case based on my belief that I'm going to win, and be able to send my bill to the town. So really, in those cases, I'm out of pocket $230, and if I win, which I typically do, I will get my $230 back. So it's just really, it's not even spending money, it's just investing money, letting the courts borrow it for a while until you get it back. So it isn't an easy question which way to go. And most times lately I've been doing it with the courts, but I would go with the GRC a lot more if they were faster.
And to piggyback off that, I actually talked to John for a project that I've been working on. One small aspect of it is the Open Public Records Act in the state. As John said, if it's something that you think the GRC can help to mediate, because you're not clear on something, or you've got kind of a situation that maybe is not, a terrible denial, and it's something that they could work with you on, that's definitely the way to start off. The problem that the GRC has, one problem that they have, is that they're supposed to have 5 members. Currently they have 3. They have 2 members who are not appointed, and the older of those 2 vacancies is 2 years old now, or maybe even longer. The members who are appointed, then there are 2 state members. One is correct me if I'm wrong, one is the Department of Education rep, and one is the DCA rep. So if there's any case that's coming in where there might be a question of a conflict of interest, where the Department of Ed rep has to step out and recuse himself, or vice versa for the DCA rep, well, now you just don't have a quorum. So they won't even decide it. So just to share some stats, in 2007, at the end of the year, they had 5 cases that remained open that they hadn't finished. At the end of 2010, and we're talking about the fiscal year, so the 2011 statistics aren't even out, probably because they have no time to do them. They had 156 cases that remained open. So their record is really deplorable. I mean, it's just they're not deciding these cases. So it's a bad way to go. But I would love if one of the more legal experts could talk about the difference, because I'm not sure if folks know, between the OPRA law and the common law right to access.
Sure. Generally, OPRA obviously is our state statute for accessing public information. So through OPRA, you are able to, if you have a denial of access, you're able to either go to the GRC or you're able to file a complaint in Superior Court. If it's in Superior Court, you've got 45 days to do so. John said, about the costs involved. The GRC, there is no statute of limitations, but you do have this long delay in the things that you're describing. Now, common law is basically not the statutory right for public records, but it is just the right of citizens to access public information that has basically evolved through our case law. And it's long-standing, and it basically is a little bit different than what is allowed under OPRA. A lot of times that it provides a more access or greater access than under OPRA, depending on what type of record you're wanting. But you do also, under common law, have to show an interest in the record. That's the first requirement. And it can be just a taxpayer interest. I mean, generally, the better interest you have, the more likely you will get it. But it can be just a wholesome public interest or a private interest. Like for my case with the Education Law Center, they obviously also have a private interest because they are an organization that advocates for this stuff that I was seeking from the Department of Education. So that's the first thing, an interest in the record. And the second thing is that your interest must outweigh the state's countervailing interest of keeping the information private. And so that is a weighing process that the court has to do to basically make sure that, that they're not releasing something that shouldn't be released.
Great, thank you. I wanted to switch gears a little bit and start talking about Sunshine Law a little bit, because I think that's still, we still need the updates. And Bobby, can you kick us off with an update on what's going on with the changes?
The updates?
Very quick, a
Sorry,
3-minute.
Yeah, I'm a little long-winded sometimes. Basically, as it's been said, the Sunshine Law hasn't really had an overhaul, if you will, since it's never had really. Since it was passed in like '75, and then it's had a couple little tweaks after that. So Senator Weinberg has basically tried, or is trying, to update both the Sunshine Law and OPRA currently. And the bill, I just want to make sure I give you the right bill number because I always confuse them. The bill that she has that updates the Open Public Meetings Act, the Sunshine Law, is 1351. It's Senate Bill 1351. And it's basically going to make this law up to speed with the age of technology. Some of the things that it's going to do is prohibit members of public bodies from communicating from the dais. So, we've all heard of complaints of people basically seeing their public bodies emailing each other, or at least emailing somebody, and no discussion on the dais. So, things come up for a vote, no one says a peep, and it all votes unanimously. So, these are things that the senator is trying to address. Now, obviously, we could spend hours and hours talking about whether or not these things will actually solve the problem, but they should help with the problem. So that's one of the things. It also is will change the notice requirement just a little bit to hopefully avoid situations where someone puts out a notice on Friday afternoon and the meeting is on Monday. So she's trying to be able so that notices must be provided and actually give at least 48 hours notice. I think the bill currently says 3 days. The law currently is 48 hours. Her bill now says 3 days, but I think that she may be moving more into 48 hours, excluding weekends and holidays.
Bobby, if I could, I haven't noticed a meeting in more than 15 years on less than 72 hours notice. There's precedent case. There was meetings thrown out where the law is you get a notice to the newspaper. The newspaper determines the newsworthiness of whether or not it prints it. You have to get it to the newspaper in time for them to print it if they determine its newsworthiness 2 business days before the meeting. So when I was a baby clerk, if I got a call from the council president at 5 to 5 on a Monday that said convene a meeting at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, I got it done. Now I wouldn't do it until Thursday. If they call me on Thursday, the soonest you're going to have a meeting is Monday. So we've been ahead of the curve in Jersey City for quite a while because We've never had a meeting knocked out in Jersey City because of a failure to meet the,
Yeah, and I will say that most, or I should say probably all the problems that we're talking about tonight, Jersey City, other towns don't have this issue because they don't do it. Unfortunately, it's the towns that do try and be sneaky and do try and pass things through. And unfortunately, there are some out there. You guys may know some. If you don't, call me up and I'll tell you some. But Jersey City, I mean, Bob knows how much knows how much I think of him and his work, and you know, and part of like the bill also does is like it makes better agendas available to the public and minutes. If you go to Mr. Burns' website, Jersey City's website, and actually go and look at what he's doing, they're already providing the things that the senator is trying to get provided to the public. You know, just basic information to appraise the public of what's actually going to be done at a meeting, and then after the fact, have the minutes reflect what is done.
if I may, we put out the agenda today. The agenda for next Wednesday's council meeting is on the World Wide Web today. Probably read by members of the public before the council even opened it up. So it's available right there. We have a nice little, what do we call those little logos we're putting on everything, so that people scan them and put them in their favorites. And
That's right.
And just jump in, the mischief that is done is when a body does not release its agenda to the public until the very moment of the meeting. The meeting convenes, the gavel comes down, the agenda goes out. They don't have to publicize their agenda for the meetings that they already advertise after in the one advertisement of all the meetings for the upcoming year. They don't have to know. They don't have to tell you what the agenda is going to be. And I've seen cases where there's a hot item, something the public is really interested in, and they won't tell the public whether or not it's going to be discussed in that meeting. Now, the person who's the champion of that locality, once they get the troops in that meeting, they can wear these people out by having them call all these people up to come to a meeting, only to have it where the item is not discussed at that meeting agenda. And they will do that time and time and time again until finally the people are so weary of having to attend all these meetings and sit through them for nothing. Then finally, when the crowd dwindles, they'll bring the matter up. That's mean spirit. And that's the kind of stuff that we really need protection against, is that kind of chicanery. And that's just one of the examples of things that will happen in some towns. So this is why I believe this bill is very important. And the ones who are already doing it, the towns are not even being affected by it.
And I will say, if I may, just because John mentioned it and I didn't make it clear, part of the changes, besides putting more information on the agenda, the bill actually requires that if they're going to talk about it and act on it, it has to be on the agenda and actually provided to the public. And so the senator is actually tweaking the language right now to make sure that that is done without jeopardizing things that maybe the public would bring up at a meeting that the body actually wants to speak about. But so that they're making, she's making a conscientious effort of trying to address these issues that John just talked about. And I also agree that the bill, I think, is a very good thing, and everyone should support it.
In the meantime, I mean, you keep on saying what they have to do. A town could voluntarily adopt an ordinance or resolution implementing these types of notices and agenda requirements, couldn't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, of course, and and people are doing it. Jersey City, other towns are doing the things already. So this really is after the ones that aren't.
I think it's largely the clerk's practice, though. I was driving home a clerk from Hudson County Municipality from a clerk's confab, and I got a call from an attorney. He was going to a council meeting in Hoboken, and he said, the clerk won't give me a copy of a resolution that's on the agenda. I said, he has to. He said, he's refusing to do so. And I turned to the clerk sitting next to me, and I said, can you believe he won't give this lawyer, and she says, I don't give out resolutions until the day after the council meeting. I hate to tell.
Also, one thing is, I want to mention that in Hillside, New Jersey, the citizens there actually, they're a fault in the community, and you have binding local initiative referendum. They passed they got enough signatures to put a sunshine bill on a local ordinance that would do many of the things that Senate Bill 1351 would do. The town has sort of kept it from happening. They passed an ordinance that was similar to it, and then they keep moving up the date by additional ordinances at which time it's going to take effect. And that's something I gotta take a look at. But there is a potential that you can get into town, if you live in a Faulkner municipality, that's one that adopts its charter under the optional municipal charter law of 1950. If you can get enough signatures on the petition, we can actually force a question like, we shall have agendas available in an ordinance, and make that something that is enforceable by law.
I also want to just one quick thing about resolutions that way. There's also towns are adopting resolutions that are basically are in opposition to everything that we're talking in the bill. So I would encourage you to find out if your town is one of those and try it and stop it or get it repealed. There's at least 70 of them already out there that have are basically against this Senate bill, and if you read the resolution, I can't believe that any public official would vote for it, let alone pass it. But get the word out there, and and for fairness to the municipalities, we are working with the League of Municipalities and trying to address the real legitimate concerns that the clerks have about the bill, and to make it fair perspective, because we definitely we don't want something that the clerks feel like we're beating up on them, and we just want it that it raises transparency for everyone.
Is that an organized list somewhere of the 70 some odd towns that are actively opposing?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes, I do.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So, okay, first question right here.
Well, it's not really a question, I'm just surprised to hear that. I'm active in Franklin Township, and we have every agenda is on the web, and after you sign up, I get emails of every town meeting, and you can click onto it, and when you click onto the council agenda, you can click on to the ordinance itself. So all the information is there. So I'm not sure why so many towns don't have a vote. We can get every piece of information we want before I even go down the meeting. And now you don't have to go down the meeting. Our council meetings, and now I have to be careful because I'm on the zoning board. Our zoning board meetings, our planning board meetings, they're all on live TV, besides recording the TV.
No, that's good. I think a lot of it is technology. Different towns have different types of technology. I mean, it can be expensive to do upgrades. So some are outdated, others have invested in it. And I don't know, how is Jersey City? Are you guys online? Because I think it saves time in the long run.
Well, we record our meetings. We don't televise them live because it's become performance art. We have, in Newark, New Jersey, they limit you to 25 speakers. And if you're speaker number 26, sorry, the speakers list is full. We don't have a limit in Jersey City. You're limited to 5 minutes. We've had people come up and strum a guitar and say taxes are too high. We have people reciting poetry, but we do have the top 15, 18 positions on the 25-member speakers list are the same recidivists, the people, and I wish they would read either the ordinance that I publish in the newspaper or the ordinance that I put up on the web. They come up and they wave the agenda, which just has the caption and says, what does this mean? Well, I wish you would have taken a moment, or everyone's moment, and read something before you came up to the microphone. And, for a lot of people, it's a night out. It's performance art, getting up and speaking before the city council.
But that's why it's good for the towns to put that stuff online, because then the citizens can come in and you can already be informed. You don't waste a lot of that time.
If you think about it, our meeting is not until next Wednesday night. Every piece of legislation before the City Council of Jersey City is online right now.
That's great.
I have some experience myself in municipal government, and we were very chary with executive sessions. I'm hoping this is relating to what you're talking about tonight. But now I've come up against a county government, which every single meeting starts out with a 2-hour executive session, every single meeting. And I have no idea what goes on. And then they have about an hour-and-a-half business meeting, which is mostly boilerplate. So I'm just wondering, first of all, if a lot of counties do this, or if this is very unusual. And if there's anything I can do to kind of curb this to some extent, I'd
Yes.
really like to.
Yes, they do. A lot of times what happens is, well, when they go into executive session, let me preface it by saying this, the reason why they're doing this is because they can. Unlike the Open Public Records Act, the Open Public Meetings Act has no provision where a successful litigant can recover his attorney's fees, no matter how wrong the government is in these suits, no matter how good the win is. So, in order to challenge them, you either have to file a pro se action in the Superior Court, or you have to hire an attorney to do that for you. And you're not going to have any chance of recovering your attorney's fees, but you probably will recover your out-of-pocket costs in court if you win. So what I'm trying to do to remedy this is I just filed a lawsuit along with a former member of the Camden City Board of Education. We filed a lawsuit against the Board of Education because of its, we believe to be errors in violations of the Open Public Meetings Act. And it's all related to the executive sessions. Before a body goes into an executive session, they have to tell you why they're going into an executive session by passing a resolution that gives the general nature of what they're going to talk about.
And it's very constrained. It's very constrained, those reasons.
Well, now, I've had, the question is, what does general nature mean?
No, there is no general nature. It has to be personnel, contractual, or litigation. That's it. In Jersey City, we don't go into I invite you, I'll give you 10 years worth of minutes, maybe you only want 2 months worth of minutes. But we go into a closed session in Jersey City no more than twice a year. And in last year, it's been over the same matter in litigation that has those 6 archive boxes in the corner of my office.
What I'm talking about is a little different. The reasons why you go into executive session, there are few. There's 9 limited reasons. But the question that I have is how, and I think a lot of people does, how detailed of a description of what you're going to talk about do you have to give? Now, some towns just say something like, we're going to go into executive session to discuss personnel, litigation, and matters of contract, or something like that. And they say the exact same thing each time they go into executive session, which is really not telling the public anything except that they're going to go into executive session. Now, I've sued in the Monroe Township Board of Education in Middlesex County, and I got an opinion out of a judge there that said that it agreed with another published law division case that said that general nature means as much information as can be given about a topic without undermining or doing violence to the reason why it needs to be discussed in an executive session in the first place. So, for instance, you don't say litigation, you say Smith versus Town. You say the name of the litigation or some way of identifying it. You name the identities of the parties to the contracts. You also, to some extent, may have to name the people who are being talked about in executive session if it's a personnel matter, and that's a little dicey. But it's more than just saying, you should say, we're going to go in for 5 things, 3 pieces of litigation described as what, and 2 contract matters described as such. And the reason why it's important to get that information is so that you can later ask for the minutes of the executive session. Now, this might take a month or so for them to come out, but when you read the minutes of the executive session, which may be redacted, you should at least be able to tell that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the things they said they were going to talk about and the things that they actually do talk about. If you find they said they were going to talk about 4 pieces of litigation, and then the minutes reveal they talk about a 5th piece of litigation, that's a violation. So what we're doing is we're asking some very fundamental questions in court. One thing is, do you have to pass a resolution? Most towns pass motions. They just say, and it's within the body of their minutes that say, a motion was made to go into executive session to talk about this and that and the other thing. But the problem with that is that as opposed to a freestanding resolution, it is actually like resolution 2009-11, you can get a copy of that resolution the next day. When it's embodied within the actual meeting minutes, and then it takes 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get the meeting minutes prepared, you can't find out the content of that motion until the meeting minutes themselves are prepared. So it is a critical question. Did the legislature, when they passed the Open Public Meetings Act, do they mean a resolution, or do they mean a motion? So we're asking the judge in Camden County to make that determination, along with the level of detail they need, and along with how soon after a meeting they have to reveal at least draft versions of the executive session minutes for members of the public who want them. So we're doing that, and when we get it done, the plan is, and we find a decision, whatever it is, we will notify each body within Camden County, every school district, this will be the assignment judge, Francis Orlando, we're sure will be handling this. He'll make a ruling, and we'll go to them and say, look, Judge Orlando said this is what the state of the law is in the Open Public Meetings Act in Camden County. If you're doing something different than this, we would urge you to correct it and conform to what Judge Orlando said, because if someone were to sue you, it's likely they would get Judge Orlando as well, and he would tell you to do the same thing that he's told Camden to do, so maybe you should save us all the trouble and just comply. Unfortunately, this is what we have to go through in order to get compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. And one of the things that Senate Bill 1351 would do is provide for attorney's fees when citizens find violations of the Sunshine Law and bring them to court to remedy them. I think if that were to happen, if nothing else, even the current Open Public Meetings Act, if it was able to be enforced vigorously and regularly and predictably, you would find, because if there were attorney fees available, you would find we'd have a lot better transparency in local government, even under the current Sunshine Law, if just that one thing was passed.
So I would just suggest to you is to kind of do what John says, which is to, to take note of what they say the reason is for them to go into executive session. And as a journalist, we were always encouraged to do this. If, you have the right to get up and object and say, in fact, if they're only saying, we're going in to discuss litigation, to say, no, you need to say, according to the Sunshine Law, you have to tell us what you have to be a little more specific.
I have a copy. I have a copy of my brief here. If you wanted to read it, even if you're in, I don't know what county you're in, it's a different county. Even if you were to say to the county attorney, Judge Orlando in Camden County said this, and you're doing it another way. I mean, it's likely that's going to have a lot more, because if I'm going to bring the case in this county and make the same arguments that Judge Orlando agreed with, I think that probably that's going to maybe get them to modify their behavior. Sometimes.
We want to hear what Robert thinks
Let
on
me
this.
I just want to, the other thing I was going to say to everyone, anytime there's a closed session, you should always get the minutes. And just make sure you go and look at it, just to see what.
We've been denied.
You're denied closed session.
They said it was executive session, you can't have it.
No, that's.
My clerk told me that.
They are wrong.
They're wrong. You gotta get.
I'm getting that tonight. That's why I'm here.
I hate to give Jersey City such a good name,
No
but
one else does. So.
we so rarely go into a closed session. Resolutions are prepared by my office. We clearly indicate what matter we're going to discuss. I am like the enforcer at these to make sure they don't go off topic, and I read all the time. I'm like one of these junkies that reads the legal ads in the newspapers, and I see all these notices of meetings that says closed session. And I'm like, they can't go into a closed session at every meeting. That can't be part of every agenda. And how these towns are getting away with it, I don't know. And this is something that Senator Weinberg's bill should be taking a good, hard look at.
Actually. Yeah, it does.
It
Well, I
can't
think-
be part of every agenda. It
I
can't
think the
be.
attorney's fees is key too, because I know NJ Fogg did a study a couple of years ago, and I think at the time she did it, there had been one citation or one violation of the Open Public Meetings Act in 30 years. It's because right now the law it's structured, it's the prosecutors. So I think it gets buried on the list of their work assignments, and so they just don't follow up on these laws.
You have seen just recently in the papers, and I think maybe John that's doing it. I basically kind of had given up on the prosecutors, and so I don't always notify them of violations, only because of what you said. The penalty in current law is $100 for a violation. So they're weighing. Is this worth $100? Getting $100. It's generally not the highest priority on their list. But just in recent months, we've actually seen some prosecutors step up and slap some hands of public bodies for emailing among themselves, like basically having meetings by email. And we've applauded those prosecutors for doing that, and it's kind of renewed my interest in seeing some of the things that has happened. But you're exactly right. With the with the inclusion of attorney's fees, it probably, obviously, will bring more litigation, and thus a little more of a watchdog to the Open Public Meetings Act.
Kai? Or no, who was it behind you?
Hi, I'm just going to stay seated. I have one really quick question, and I'm not a journalist or anybody who ever held an office, or I'm not studying to, be a politician, so they're pretty basic. Is there a time limit by when meeting minutes have to be available? We've got some commissions and, other things in our town, it's up to 18 months and so on, and we're told we're working on it. So that's question number one.
Get a faster typist.
Well, I'm fortunate, I have a court reporter. We digitally record our council meetings, and our minutes are done. I signed the minutes for the November 9th meeting yesterday,
Okay, but
and the council
is
president
there
signed them
a
yesterday.
legal, time limit by when minutes have to be prepared?
I have it right here. as a matter of fact. What we have is, in doing this lawsuit against Camden, I dug up every court case I could find that deals with the issue of the timeliness of meeting minutes. I'm a plaintiff in some of these cases. In all the ones that I've done, except for one, the judges held that meeting minutes need to be made available before the next scheduled meeting of the body, or within 30 days, whichever is sooner. Draft versions of those minutes. Now, a lot of clerks will tell you, we can't give you those meeting minutes until after we approve them. No. You can provide meeting minutes in draft form prior to them being released. At least that's, well, the GRC has a different opinion on that, but that's the GRC. But everybody else besides the GRC is pretty much on board. Even the clerk's manual that they use to instruct their clerks say, just mark them draft and produce them whenever you can and get them out to the person and give them to the person marked draft. But if you were to read Paft versus Keyport Borough Council, and Absecon, that was a city of, one of the cities in Atlantic County, I've sued several of them, where the judges said that the rule is 30 days or before the next meeting, whichever is sooner. And that depends a lot. It's really a case-by-case basis on how often they meet, how much staff do they have, those types of things. But the judges, but the rule was promptly available. And promptly available, I tell you, under any definition, is not 18 months.
And that's
So,
also
yeah.
for something like planning board, zoning board, redevelopment agency, not just city council?
Well, that will be all of those bodies. They're all doing critical government work that the public has a keen interest in. And they have to provide their meeting minutes within, I would say 30 days is a pretty good feels about.
Okay, and
If anyone-
I'm just gonna.
Yeah, if anyone is waiting like 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 18 months, I mean, no. I mean, I know John has a demand letter, I have a demand letter that gets recycled and recycled. My card is somewhere, call me, I'll send a letter tomorrow. I mean, that's just uncalled for.
Okay, and just, I'm gonna sneak in.
Okay, one more.
One more, please, because, again, I'm just like, the next time you go to the supermarket and someone's walking around, that's me, okay? That's how much experience I have with half, all of what you're talking about. When it comes to putting in an OPRA request, I'm that one person that, I heard, the city did vote on, changing those street lamps 3 years ago, and we don't know why that never happened, right? So my OPRA request would be something like, can I have the minutes of the meeting where they passed the resolution to change the street law? I don't know what year, I don't know what date, I don't know what else to call it. So I guess what I'm asking everybody up there for is for some average person like me that is very unsophisticated with knowing what to put on that title line of the document I want, is there some kind of template or naming structure? How do I make my best guess to get what I want? I know the subject matter, I know kind of what I'm looking for, but not too much more.
Doing exactly.
Pick up a phone. Pick up a phone. People will actually answer the phone. And if you say to me, when did they put up the decorative lights on Central Avenue? I'll say, the Special Improvement District did that about 3 years ago. Everything doesn't have to be reduced to an OPRA request. We do about 1,000 a year in Jersey City, but we fulfill 1,500 to 1,800 requests. Person walks into my office, they want a copy of a budget. They don't fill out a form to get a copy of a budget. Here you go. I have, you know, it's silly. The more specific you can be, but try to get a person on the phone who has a little sense of the history of the town, and the more specific you can be, the sooner you'll get the record.
Yeah, and the first thing I would say exactly is to make that call, because if you have a good relationship, then you don't have to, you know, worry about putting in the OPRA. And even if you have to put in the OPRA, I can tell you from personal experience that, you know, using the same agency, that it was when the executive director changed that things went from, you know, all rejections to suddenly getting documents very easily, because the guy who was in charge of the agency just didn't want to get stuff out. He didn't want to deal with it. But I would also say, you know, if there's something that's historical you can't find, you can always look it up in the, you know, look it up in the newspaper, or you know, try to narrow it down. And yes, be as specific as possible, because again, if you give, unfortunately, if you don't give the right name of what you're looking for, it'll come back no such document, or you'll just get something completely different. And I would ask, maybe, I don't know if John has, because John talked about having kind of like knowing, I'm asking for document, you know, UCR, blah, blah, line numbers, blah, blah. Do you have a list somewhere, John, that folks maybe could?
I don't have it online anywhere, but I know some of the documents. But in that particular case with the street lights, I would probably try calling this. But I mean, I recognize not every town out there is like Jersey City. Some of these guys really just don't want to give you the information, and they're not going to tell you anything on the telephone. They're going to tell you, you want it, you put it in an open request, or we ain't talking to you. I mean, I've actually had these conversations. Unfortunately, that's the reason we need OPRAs, because not all these clerks are all that great. So I always put in my background. I tell them the way that you would explain what you want is exactly the way you did it, but you would write it out. Background. I don't know when this passed. I know it's probably in the last 3 years is my best guess, but I'm trying to figure this out. And remember, guys, you would say to the clerk that Mason versus Hoboken, the Supreme Court of New Jersey said that the purpose of the Open Public Records Act is not to have the custodians and the records requesters play games with each other with semantics. It's to have it where people who are citizens and taxpayers actually get a hold of the records they want. That's what the goal is, and because of that, the requesters and the custodians are supposed to cooperate with one another to be able to help each other out and get the stuff that the people need in their hands. So I remind them of that. I say, look, I don't know how to frame my request because I don't know how you arrange your records down there. And I'm not trying to cause you a lot of trouble and make your life difficult. I just want to know when those streetlights are put up. So can you tell me a better way? And I put that in an OPRA request. Could you give me the records that you think I want? Or if I'm not asking for it right, tell me how I should ask for it. Now, I also know when I'm doing that, I'm not quite that naive. I know that if I'm in front of a Superior Court judge with this very honest, earnest, helpful request, and I just get a denied from the clerk, the Superior Court judge is probably going to look at that clerk and say, the guy here was really trying in order to get you to cooperate. Okay? And then this is the reason why, and it's probably going to work in my favor. So I would say write the clerk a 2-paragraph thing of what you're trying to find out and ask him for any records that would satisfy what I just wrote in background above. And send it in and see what you get back. And a lot of times I think that'll work. If they're not helpful, they might find it's been in their better interest to be helpful because it could be they'll lose a law case later on.
You know, the laws of the state of New Jersey don't help very much. To get a tax abatement in the state of New Jersey, you have to be an urban renewal corporation. Now, we have a beautiful Hyatt hotel on the waterfront on the Hudson River in Jersey City. If you called up and said, I want a copy of the tax abatement for the Hyatt Hotel, you'd have to know that it's called the South Pier Urban Renewal Corporation. No one is going to ask that. They're going to be the translator for, oh, you want the Hyatt? Okay, that's the South Pier Urban Renewal Corporation tax abatement. So a phone call, we still answer the phones, as much as people think we don't.
We have some towns that
If I may, my anxiety level is reaching alarm, especially regarding school districts, which my understanding is probably the reason OPRA came into existence because of the resistance or lack of knowledge of what I understand the equivalent of a city clerk is the BA, the business administrator. And that's a whole other issue of how they're trained, what they know, and how they will operate in a school district. So could you share some of your experiences without scaring the crap out of them?
Well, if I can just, this is in the news recently too, and it's actually, I'm sorry, it's a bad story, but I do want to point out that there is a difference, actually. What we're talking about is records. There's actually not a right to get information necessarily. So there's a case actually right now up in Rockaway Township where, this is bizarre, it was in the ledger, the school board paid something like $14,000 to a firm to sweep their property to make sure there were no bugs, no listening devices. Okay, so the ledger got a copy of the contract, but now went and asked the board, why did you do this? And they say, no comment. So sadly, there's no requirement for them to actually, further explain themselves, which it's just kind of crazy.
Emails, you talked about the technology. The emails of board members. I think there's a case in Summit that has to deal with this. I don't know if it's before that or the city, I'm sorry. But it has to do with, so supposedly inadvertently hitting the reply all button and essentially conducting business without the public's knowledge. What would be the type of request that should be made from a citizen to get access to that?
Yeah, I would say, I'd like to put this request in. I look at their calendar and I find out they met on August 18th, they met on July 15th. I would say, if they met on August 18th, I would ask for all the emails in which any board member was a sender or a recipient, and then the other board member was a sender or a recipient. They were sent between August 15th and August 18th of 2011, in which any official business of the board was discussed. Included within this request are not only the ones that are sent and received on the district server, but also the ones that might have been sent and received from the individual board member's Yahoo account or their Gmail account or whatever.
Their personal device.
Their personal.
Request will do that.
Well,
Yes.
now what you're gonna find, here's what's gonna happen, is they're gonna give you the ones that are on the server, they will give you those. You'll get those. With the ones with the Gmail accounts, they're gonna have to go to the individual board members themselves and say, well, you can't, we need you to provide for us these emails. So now the board member's now being the filter of which ones he wants to give up and which ones he doesn't want to give up. And then when they confront this problem, you should remind them that the DARM, the Division of Archives and Records Management says that these are government records, whether they're sent on personal email account from Yahoo to Gmail, that's a government record, and the custodian of that record is responsible for retaining those emails in a manner which would meet federal evidence requirements or standards. So they have to actually retain those emails. So it can't be up to the board members themselves to be able to delete their emails. Sometimes when I have a clerk, when I have a town that is particularly nasty with me, what I will do is I'll look back in the newspaper and I'll find the identity of a councilman who was not reelected, let's say in December of 2008, who lost his term. And I will then OPRA in 2011 for that councilman's emails that occurred while he was a councilman in 2008. And let them go work on that for a while. Now they have to track the guy down and they have to figure that. And then that makes very, very clear the point that they're not allowed to do that. So there shouldn't be any, and I know how they work, there should be a municipal email account or a school board, something like cityofnewark.org account for every municipality, for every municipal elected official. And there should be a rule that says that they cannot but use that email account for any official correspondence. And if they get an email on the personal email account from somebody, that they should immediately copy that to the business administrator or to the city clerk so that it is preserved, and then tell the person, the correspondent, that they're never to contact them on that address again, but instead use their official email. But that is a huge problem, and that's what Bobby was talking about before. Those kinds of guidelines have been laid down in Gloucester County and in Burlington County. The county prosecutors said, guys, you can't do this anymore. You got to start adopting some policies. And those policies are now being adopted. It's time for, I know the case you're talking about in Summit, that the Union County prosecutor, and I did ask the Union County prosecutor if they, given that Burlington and Gloucester has done the same, if they would adopt similar policies there, and hopefully this will become a statewide policy.
Has Jersey City adopted a policy?
We haven't needed to, but I've admonished the city council about shutting their devices off In fact, I take out my cell phone. I've got this, my daughter has, sitting over there, she has an iPhone. I use this, I take it out, I silence it, and I say, everyone, we have a three-strike policy in Jersey City. If I hear your cell phone go off, I'm gonna strike you 3 times. And we have the council members, I tell them, shut their personal devices off. First, it's rude. It's just plain rude to be sitting there and being on your BlackBerry. You're supposed to be listening and conducting the public business.
I can't call that a order because I said, hey, no cell phones, went off twice with one ordinance.
I just wanted to say one more thing about DARM. That's exactly how I also fashion my request, only I go one step further. And because under DARM, which is the Division of Archives and Records Management, under the Destruction of Public Records Law, no public official is able to destroy a public record without getting DARM's permission. So I usually back it up, and when you know that they're communicating over private emails, I ask them, obviously for the emails, but I also ask for what policies they have in place to ensure that they're getting all the emails on private accounts, as well as any requests made to DARM to destroy such emails that were made on email accounts. And usually that really gets them,
Okay, we have the gentleman with the microphone.
Yes, there's 2 issues in our township, hopefully you can clarify for us tonight. One is that our agendas, our resolutions on our agenda are posted in the bulletin board outside the meeting hall, but they're 3x5 bulletin board and they're thumbtacked one on top of the other, so you can't read them. But that's not the issue. The issue is that after the hearings on ordinances are done and the public participation is done and the consent agenda is voted on, at the end of the meeting, there's new business. And just about every single meeting, we have 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 new resolutions. Motion to introduce, vote, and they pass them. We've never seen them, they're not on the agenda, we don't get an opportunity to question them because we didn't know they existed.
We have a policy in Jersey City. If the agenda went out today is a Thursday before next Wednesday's meeting. If the city council wants to add a resolution to the agenda, they have to do so by a 2/3 vote at the meeting. It doesn't matter, we could have an emergency come up between now and next Wednesday, and it could be something very legitimate. It still requires a 2/3 vote of the 6, and if only 6 people show up we have a 9-member council, if only 6 people show up, it requires 6 votes out of 6. So we actually vote to add those items to the agenda, and they are there, available for the public to read, and to have before the meeting, before they're read.
And I bet you can call tomorrow and OPRA a copy of that policy, so you can introduce it in your own town, right?
Sure, why not? That's one of the things that 1351 will address, is that they're called them late starters. And a lot of times the mayor's looking around the room to taking the pulse of the opposition that's there, and sees that there's not the opposition, the audience is there, then the late starter will come out. And that's bad, okay? But unfortunately, there is nothing in OPRA right now that prohibits that. It's allowed. But under the new rule, it would be that you can't put something, I believe you can't put something on the agenda that wasn't on the previously announced agenda unless it qualifies as an emergency, which is a whole separate thing as what an emergency is. And there has to be not only a supermajority vote, but there has to be findings that they couldn't have possibly known about this at the time they created the agenda. That this is something that happened just now, and it really is truly an emergency. That would help curtail some of that kind of shenanigans.
And the other issue is we've had an epidemic the last 3 or 4 years, town employees suing our township. And we've had settlements. One girl got $600,000, another one $500,000, $325,000, $160,000. And the night they vote, they pass a resolution to approve the settlement in case, John Smith versus so-and-so. This is my wife here, she's got up a many and says, can we know what this was all about? No, there's a confidentiality agreement. Now, is that legal?
Not anymore. Not since Asbury Park Press versus Monmouth County. They said that the confidentiality agreements They bind the people, actually, they're right, they can't talk about it. But you can OPRA the settlement agreement, and you can OPRA I always ask for the most recently amended version of the civil complaint filed in the case, and you can read all about it, and you can read and you can see what the allegations were, and you can see what the financial settlement was.
And there was another case more recently that basically said that they can't hide them by keeping them with the insurance carrier or with their outside counsel. So then if the town comes back and say, oh, well, we don't have it, it's, our counsel, our legal counsel that is, has it, you have the right to get them to get that from them as well.
We get it through
The
all-
settlement agreement.
In Jersey City, we're settling a lawsuit, or we expect to settle a lawsuit next Wednesday. The council received a confidential memo from the Corporation Council delineating the reasons why we should be settling the lawsuit, and it was distributed only to the council, to the mayor, business administrator, and if the suit is settled on Wednesday night, the resolution and that letter is a public document on Thursday morning in Jersey City.
Thank you very much, I'll be right.
You're lucky that your town even votes on their settlements. A lot of towns just,
Some towns that I've seen, the elected officials don't even know. The lawsuit comes in. The lawsuit gets filed with the insurance carrier by the clerk. The insurance carrier does all the negotiations and settles the lawsuit without even informing the elected official that the lawsuit was settled. I had this happen at Gloucester County town where I went to the newspaper, the Gloucester County Times, and told them that one of their police beating victims got $95,000 or something. And then I learned that some of the members of the borough council that employed the officer were surprised, and they had no idea that had occurred. So I have actually gotten a town in Sussex County to pass an ordinance that would require them, at a designated part of the agenda, to inform the public of any lawsuits that have been settled since the last report was given. That's Andover Township. Because the insurance companies just handle it all. But it's one thing for the public not to know, but the elected officials that employ the police officer want to know, lest the same cop could get sued 5 times. And the cop, they give him an award at the next meeting because they didn't even So,
Yeah, and in some towns, the ordinances will actually say up to a certain dollar amount. So like you may have like a town that says, up to 25,000, our third-party agents, our counsel, legal counsel, or insurance carrier can handle it, but everything above that has to be done by resolution. But it is definitely something that you should know, and regardless, you would be able to get the
That
settlement.
lawsuit was Asbury Park v. what?
yeah, Asbury Park Press and PATH versus versus the county of Monmouth.
That's great. All right, right here, microphone. And then you, ma'am, right behind him. We'll go to him first.
A question on relationship management, particularly for beat reporters and professional journalists. Colleen knows me well, we worked together at our mutual previous job. And I've worked a number of jobs where I've overseen a lot of fairly young journalists. And I've sent them sometimes on sort of errands to do OPRA requests, sometimes just general fishing, go get all the police salaries or the teacher salaries or the administrator salaries. And they're mortified every time that they're going to anger the officials that they deal with. And, on one hand, I just want to tell them, suck it up and tell your officials to suck it up. We're legally entitled to the information, there's a public interest in the information. Knowing what that information is does not necessarily mean any sort of condemnation. We don't want to necessarily know teacher salaries to say they're too high. We just want to know what they are because, they work for the public, they're paid by the public. Maybe what we'll learn is they're perfectly reasonable, but we don't know until we ask. But I'm sympathetic to the fact that these reporters, often trying to build relationships in the communities, they have to continue covering the next day. They're going to have to call these clerks sometimes on the weekend for a favor that the clerk's under no obligation to meet. They're going to try to work off that relationship often, and some people will take that request as an affront, even if there's no legal argument for denying it. So I'm actually most curious from Colleen, who's been doing this for a long time, and Robert, who's on the other end of that, what they see is the best way to manage that civilly without running into that tension.
Well, that's why I think, as Robert's been saying, to make that phone call first, that's really the thing to do. Gannett did actually twice, once right before, I think, OPRA was revamped, or right at the beginning of that process, and once a few years ago. All the Gannett papers made requests for certain documents, budgets, salaries of every town within our coverage areas, and then gauged just how well, how well we were given documents, and, it was amazing how many places, at least in the first round, wouldn't even give you the budget, just the basic stuff. Things have gotten much better because of OPRA, because there's been training, because the clerks know at least about some of those basic documents. But certainly, as I've asked for this kind of stuff, it's, you make a nice phone call, and especially if it's a reporter who feels very uncomfortable with doing that. Wasn't my idea, my boss made me, right, that kind of
myself
thing.
the bad guy 40
Exactly,
minutes into that
exactly, that kind of thing. And there's really nothing to, and just try to give assurances. We're collecting this from several communities, or we're collecting it both from the school board and from the municipality. We're not, and to say what you said, we're not going in any kind of preconceived notions. We're not trying to say, you're all making too much money or whatever. It's just, and ultimately it's a public document, and then if you have to, file the open request, do it respectfully. Don't make that phone call on the 8th day and say, you didn't give me that document, you're violating the law, we're gonna take you to court, we're gonna sue you. I mean, that's not gonna get you what you...
I don't know if I have the budget to sue them, but...
Well, you can, right. But just to try to be as civil as possible, and try to give the clerks as much leeway as possible, and be as nice as possible, because he's a nice guy.
Well, we grew up reading the same Jersey Journal newspaper. It used to be an enormous broadsheet the size of the Star Ledger. Now it's a tiny little tabloid, and really it's a shadow of its former self. I break in more reporters for the Jersey Journal than do the editors, and they come. And Melissa's a great person. She's working for the Record now, right? Yeah, she's a great person. And they come and go. We establish great relationships. I had a reporter apologized to me for a couple months ago because he had to put my salary in the newspaper. I said, well, it's your job. He says, well, I just want to let you know, I'm doing a story and your salary is going to be in the newspaper. I said, well, it's public information. Anyone can go on go to the Asbury Park Press, and I think every public salary in the state. I'm not ashamed of my salary, I earn it. But, the reporters, I get along great with the reporters. And honestly, they come to me and say, you got anything for me? And I'm like, well, this is like, here, this will be like an evergreen story for you. Write this, and you put this one in your pocket for a couple weeks.
You gotta have some colleagues who don't as wholeheartedly embrace the public nature of a public position.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is too, I think, is to just make sure that people don't ambush anyone. I mean, it's nice, Robert is the kind of person who isn't gonna care that his salary gets it, but some people might, and so don't.
Especially in the smallest towns.
Right. So even though it may be a hard call for some people to make, you do have to make that call. I mean, we did it in a couple of different series we did. Or like the cop who's getting a $275,000 sick time payout because he didn't use a day of sick leave or vacation time in his 20 years. You got to make the call and at least give them the chance to give an explanation, to say something, because then at least they know they're not surprised when they read the paper the next day.
Or the police chief making $280,000 a year and having time to do $60,000 a year in part-time security work.
Right.
Well, some of the stuff that you're asked for, there's no way it's not going to be confrontation. And I mean, I have one in a small Burlington County town now where the mayor owns the gas station where all the fire trucks and municipal vehicles purchase their fuel. There's no contract. Okay? There's no way you're going to ask for that information without somebody thinking you might as well put a target on that mayor. And that's exactly the reason why I asked him. Well, one thing I find is I'm not a journalist. So I think that one thing journalists might want to do is encourage citizen activists in the town to start using the OPRA and start doing some of those requests, because you can't do it all. And I know a lot of times I get stories and I turn them over to the newspapers because, so I'm actually an adjunct, I'm an unpaid adjunct to newspapers. So, but I think it is to encourage citizens to start making requests. Maybe, that way you wouldn't have to do so much.
A weekly that I used to work for several jobs back, we had a lot of informal agreements to be the slash and burn reporters for each other.
Yeah.
Trade beats for a week just for that story. And although it meant you were giving up the juicy story in your town, we got a lot of things that some of our newest people would have been uncomfortable with asking for.
there's going to be adversarial relationships between people who want to keep, that are doing bad things, and want to keep a secret, and people who are trying to expose it. There's going to have to be an adversarial relationship. There's no way to cover that any other way than this, unfortunately.
We are running, we're actually past time, but I wanted, there was 2 more questions, people, and we are gonna say, I just wanna be clear, I billed this as ending at 8:30, and I know there's probably 100 more questions, but, so please, if you need to leave, leave. I wanna be respectful of the panelists, if they're okay. If we could just, are we okay right now? And I know, are we okay?
You're okay?
Yeah, let me just expand on one thing real quickly on what John said. When you talk about the citizen activists, anybody who's out there who's looking to do a good job in terms of your towns and you know, check on documents, there's a great group up in Mount Arlington. They're called CARMA, C-A-R-M-A. So you can Google CARMA, or it's www.mountarlingtoninformed, all one word, INFORMED.com. They did such a good job. Every year there's a sunshine, I forget the name of the national group, but that gives out a Sunshine Award. And I had nominated them a couple of years ago, and they won 2nd place, which meant a trip to Washington and a little bit of cash, which helped them. But they get check registers, they get all contracts. I mean, they just Google, they OPRA for everything, and they put it online. And it's just, if you're looking for, you know, what kind of information can you get out of a town, that's a great way to see what kind of things are available if you're...
Are you thinking of Crew, Citizen, what is it? Crew, God, what is it? Responsibility and Ethics in Washington?
Maybe.
All right.
The Center for Responsible Politics, well, I think you're talking about the Sunlight Foundation.
Yeah, Sunlight
All right,
Foundation.
that's what you said.
Ma'am, who's been
Okay.
holding the mic for like 10 minutes.
Sorry.
I started to get involved in my local town about 17 months ago when my taxes went up so much, and then once I started looking at everything, I realized that a lot of things weren't making sense. And I said, well, don't put in OPRAs, just ask questions. And when I started asking questions and they realized the questions were going to be a little bit sensitive, then they just said, forget it. Then the OPRAs come back on the 7th day at 4:59. We're not sure what you mean by that question. Could you please clarify? Or they just don't answer it, or they say they have bids and they don't have bids.
OPRA does not require you to answer questions.
Oh, no. I'm
Okay.
not even talking about a question.
Okay.
I'm talking about, I have a report, this is how much somebody made, now I'd like a copy of the contract. Then they
Okay.
write back and say, did you mean the 2011 we don't know what you mean, we don't know what year you mean. So, you know, I've learned a lot in the process. I've since had to file a suit against the town, and I had some help, because the town was making up that they had answered all the questions when they had not. They were making up they had meetings when they didn't have meetings. They were making up my whereabouts when I wasn't in the building, like crazy, crazy stuff. So at what point, I've now filed a lawsuit, they've asked for an extension on the lawsuit, for them not following their own procedures that they set up. And specifically on bids, when I asked for bids, they said they got, now they don't have any copies. So, I can't spend 5 hours a day on this, but I could file away and go to Superior Court like every week now. But what case, how do you decide what case you're gonna take, these guys, I guess what you're gonna look at and help on? Because it just seems like...
Sort of overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming, and now it's kind of snowballed. Well, if you say you have bids and I ask for the bids, where are they?
Turn it over to someone who's going to write about it. They love that kind of stuff.
Where are you from? Which patch?
I work with a number of the ones in Morris County.
Oh, I'm down in Monmouth
I
County.
can
What
get
town?
the right
What
town.
town? Yep.
I'm in Wall Township.
Oh, I know.
There is a Wall Township,
There is.
There is.
Bruce
The
Bryant,
former active
right?
Northwest reporter,
Wait.
Keith Brown.
Keith Brown.
Right, I do know Keith Brown, but some of the things just don't make it into the papers as they should be in the papers. And, we write letters, certified letters, they don't get answered. So at what point, it's just to the point where I filed this one suit, and they get their side in the paper, like, I can't believe this person has wasted so much of our time already that now she has the nerve to file a lawsuit.
Sounds like you need to pick up some nominating petitions and take them out.
Yeah, but you're one person against 4 people.
No, I think
Not necessarily if there's a groundswell in your town, if everyone is feeling like
Yeah,
that.
but
It sounds
everybody's
like-
afraid. Nobody wants to speak up. People will, tell me information and give it to me, but don't say I gave it to you, but
I mean,
go
it's-
for it.
We gotta get to another, I think your answer is be vigilant, try to get John to help you, go to the press, try to get them to write a story.
Pace yourself, don't burn
And
out.
file a nominating petition to run for office and scare them into maybe giving them to you.
Even if it's,
I'm
even
sorry,
if it's
let
for
me-
county committee, run for county committee.
Right.
I
Wait,
wanna give someone else a question,
Wait, I
I'm
just wanna
sorry.
see if you could email me the thing on the emails. They emailed this very confidential thing to all their personal email accounts. And I brought it up and handed it to them and said, can you please explain to me why this business is going on in personal email accounts when you didn't CC the clerk? And they all
Was it
just,
Half versus Evesham?
yeah, like how can I,
Jersey?
what can I send them to say, you need to CC the clerk, you can't transact this important business?
I have a standard letter, if you email me,
Can I-
if you email me, I'll email you my standard letter that I send to them, that tells them that they have to maintain the emails that their elected
Okay.
officials will send.
And this email, like when I asked for it via the OPRA, they now don't have it. Well, how do you not have it? Did you throw it out? What did you do with it?
They're not following the guidelines.
But that's where I have to file another one in Superior Court. It's just so time consuming.
Alright, you get John's email and you guys
Oh, wait,
can
I'm
talk
sorry.
and get more. Bruce?
Yes,
And then David.
more and more people, as you know, are living in condominiums. And condominiums are kind of another little murky world. And Bobby, something you mentioned kind of provoked some thinking, or a question on my part. As many of you know, or may not know, that the amount of fees that we pay as condominium owners for maintenance usually as much as 50% or more of our taxes. So it really is almost like a tax. It's paying for public services. In many ways, it operates like a public body, but it's not protected by OPRA. And something you said, Bobby, and I guess the question is, for all of us citizens who are trying to find out what's going on, or trying to get records and information from condominium associations, which basically argue they are not subject to some of the same state laws. You said something about common law rights for information as opposed to OPRA rights. Could you elaborate, are there any common law rights which apply to condominium associations, or is that another whole world that we just have no rights?
Well, it really is, both OPRA and common law, the common law rights are still public records in the sense that a public agency, a government agency has to have made them. As far as like condo type stuff, I mean, there are, so you're not going to get any help with those. I usually direct people though to the DCA and some of the oversight that the Department of Community Affairs can provide. I do know that they will help people get a hold of financial documents and try and mediate between groups if things are really bad. But it's tough out there, I know, but unfortunately it does not fall into to these laws.
Unfortunately, Ed Hanneman of DCA is just so frustrated because he will tell you flat out that our current state laws really leave condominium owners very, very vulnerable, not being able to have public meeting act laws, sunshine laws, all this stuff doesn't apply to.
You'll need legislation for that. But I mean, there is sort of a change, there's like a flux in the law of what is and is not a public agency. And like recently, the League of Municipalities was found to be an agency subject, and it wasn't before. And I'm thinking like, you want to keep, I would like to keep expanding that incrementally. Like another one that strikes me are these private companies that provide medical services to prisons. Then they get sued. And then the prison says, well, we don't know, they're a private company, but they're doing a traditional job of a government agency. So it feels right that they should also be subject to some of the same laws that government agencies are. But I think that the condominium thing is pretty far on that scale, and you're going to need legislation in order to get.
Okay, that's here.
Hi, a sewerage authority, would that be subject to all of these laws?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Two other quick questions. A lot of great information here today. Will there an audio of this meeting be available, perhaps either emailed or available on a
There'll be a
website?
video. Our friend back here, Steve Stern, is videotaping it, so he'll have it be loading it tonight. Or no, next week.
Fill out a request tomorrow.
Next week.
On what
It'll be
site?
available online next week.
on, what's the name of the
30
site?
days or less.
Oh, it'll be on YouTube. I'll email out the link. So definitely you'll get it either through the Citizens Campaign website or the Hyperlocal News Association website, which is www.njhna.org or thecitizenscampaign.com.
One more quick question. This is regarding email availability. We recently had a candidates night in our town, and I found out after one of the candidates up at the dais kept looking down, and we realized she had her cell phone on and was probably getting texted the answers. So, is that something that we can get at? She was elected.
It wasn't a public record at the time, because there was an email that she was not an officer at the time that she got it. I just think it's pretty bad form to do.
Yeah, I just think that speaks for itself, that you bring that up.
All right.
I have a question about recordings at the township meetings. When there is a township recording, clerk, are we allowed a copy of the recordings?
Oh,
yes.
Absolutely. Also, in addition, there is, as for example, there's a secretary of a board who's recording the meetings via her iPhone, and she says she's storing them at her house. Is that allowed, or,
No.
she says that if you want to make an OPRA request or anything, you can send it to me, and I'll be storing them at my house, and I'll be.
To her personally?
Yes, well, that's what she's representing, that she's gonna store them in her, and she'll have care, custody, and control of them on herself.
Because I think that the DARM has standards of preserving records. I mean, I had one where the keyboard, one thing down in keyboard, they kept their records in unlocked beach house, it would get flooded periodically. It was ridiculous.
So like federal rules of evidence?
They have to keep it a certain way, and I think that if you were to consult with DARM, the DARM, there's people down there that will talk to you, that there are, and I think just reading the regulations, they have to have some sort of backup.
Yeah, recordings have to be maintained basically for 80 days afterwards. It's not much, but that's what the current regulation is. So John is absolutely right. What is in place for her to keep these and to assure that they're, I mean, it gets down to when you're talking about storing records, like there's requirements of, the facility and the safety of it and all those sort of things. So that's a very problematic situation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you as well, so I was just curious.
Great. I have to end it now. I'm getting the cutoffs. I think we're going to lose the room too. So I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank our excellent panel.